Good evening, everyone. I'm the storyteller, Mr. 13 O'Clock, and tonight I'll lead you into the dark with these 13 eerie horror stories on Restaurant. But before we begin, 99% of viewers haven't subscribed, so please do subscribe and help grow the channel. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time the night calls you. Leave a comment below. Now, settle in and let the stories begin.
It was a Thursday night, one of those chaotic evenings where every plate felt like a ticking clock, and the kitchen's heartbeat thudded louder with each incoming order. La Serena was an upscale seafood restaurant perched on a quiet corner of town, known for its dim lighting and saltwater tanks that bubbled like something alive was waiting inside. That night, the staff was one man short. The usual dishwasher, Hector, hadn't shown up, and his replacement, a quiet guy named Eli, had been hired through a temp agency just that morning. He was in his late 20s, thin, pale, and oddly calm in the frantic energy of the kitchen. The chefs liked him immediately. Efficient, fast, no complaints. His eyes, though, no one could place what was off about them. They weren't unkind, just quiet, distant, like he was watching something the rest of them couldn't see. He didn't talk much. When asked if he'd done kitchen work before, he simply said, "A long time ago." Eli kept to himself, working at the deep sink with near-mechanical rhythm. Plates went in, spotless china came out. Hours passed. The noise, the heat, the orders shouted back and forth. All of it swirled like a storm around him, but he never broke stride. Like he'd done 1,000 times. Like he'd never left. Then came a sound. It wasn't loud, just strange. Like a fork scraping porcelain, but drawn out and distorted, as if echoing underwater. It came from a back, near the exit door by the dish station. At first, the staff thought it was just a plate falling or a clumsy bump in the chaos. But when it happened again, louder, and followed by a muffled thud, a hush settled over the kitchen. The head chef, Marcus, shouted over the din, "Eli, you get back there?" No answer. They checked the dish station. Eli was gone. Not gone on break. Not gone to the bathroom. Not outside having a smoke. Just gone. The spray hose was still running, dripping rhythmically into a shallow puddle on the floor. A half-scrubbed pot sat in the sink. Steam still rose from the hot water. His apron still hung on the hook. But there was no trace of him. No one saw him leave. The back door security alarm, designed to chime if opened, hadn't gone off. The exit camera, reviewed later, glitched around the time of his disappearance, showing only static and a warped black silhouette for 2 full minutes. At first, the staff thought he might have just quit mid-shift. It happens. People crack, especially in that pressure cooker of a kitchen. But when the agency was called to report the walkout, the manager was told something that chilled him deeper than the freezer ever could. "There's no Eli on our roster," they said. "We didn't send anyone to you today." They triple-checked the paperwork. Nothing. No hire form. No signature. No background check. No one named Eli had ever been scheduled. The staff even called Hector's emergency contact. He hadn't been sick or no-showed. He died in a car crash the previous night. There was no dishwasher on duty that night. At least, not one anyone could trace. But that wasn't the end of it. Strange things started happening in the days that followed. Small at first. Silverware missing. Plates returned with odd stains that looked like saltwater residue. The back hallway near the dish station would smell faintly of brine, even when freshly cleaned. And sometimes, only during dinner rush, the staff would hear it again. That scraping sound, drawn out, metallic, wet. One night, a busboy swore he saw someone hunched over the dish pit, scrubbing furiously. But when he approached, the figure straightened and turned. No face. Just water pouring from the sockets like tears. He quit on the spot. The owners eventually replaced the sink, moved the dish station to the other side of the kitchen, hired new staff. But every so often, when the restaurant fills with chatter and clinking glasses and the pressure builds to a boil, the scraping returns. And if you go back there, alone, you might find a single dish. Still warm, still wet, sitting in the sink, waiting. Some say Eli never existed, that the stress of a fast-paced kitchen created a mass hallucination. Others believe something darker moved through La Serena that night, wearing a man's name like a mask. But maybe, just maybe, some places remember those who were supposed to be there. And when someone dies before their shift is finished, the job isn't over. Not even after death. Freezers hum with a kind of mechanical indifference. It's a sound most people ignore, the constant low vibration of metal and frost. But for Kyle, that sound started to mean something else entirely. Kyle had only been working at Hillbrook Diner for 3 months. The job was simple enough. Prep work during the afternoon, dishes during the night shift. The pay was bad, the hours were worse, but it was quiet. He liked quiet, or at least he used to. It started with the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, just behind the thick steel door of the walk-in freezer. At first, he thought it was someone playing a prank. The kitchen crew was known for that kind of thing. But when he flung open the door, no one was there. Just boxes of frozen meat and pale racks of pre-portioned fries. The others brushed it off. One of the cooks joked that the freezer was probably haunted by all the cows they'd butchered. Kyle gave a polite laugh, but the chill didn't leave his spine. He tried to ignore it, but the sounds didn't stop. By the second week, he started hearing voices. Faint, muffled, like someone speaking from inside the walls. They were hard to make out at first, but they always came when he was alone. After close, when the lights were dimmed and the fryer oil had gone still, he'd be washing trays or taking out the trash and hear them behind the freezer door. At first, he assumed it was a vent echo or the building settling. But one night, he stopped what he was doing and pressed his ear to the freezer. And someone whispered, "Don't leave me in here." Kyle stumbled back. The voice was small, fragile. It sounded like a child. He reported it to his manager, who simply raised an eyebrow and told him to lay off the energy drinks. No one else heard anything, they said. Maybe he needed sleep. Maybe he was just tired. But the voices got worse. Sometimes it was crying. Sometimes it was laughter, but twisted, hollow, like someone trying to imitate joy without understanding what it meant. He once heard something that sounded like scraping fingernails on the metal interior. The sounds came from inside the freezer, but the security camera above the door never caught anything. It didn't help that there was no camera inside. One night, he decided to record it. He waited until the diner closed. The others had left. Kyle stayed behind, pretending to clean. He set his phone just outside the freezer and hit record. The voices didn't come at first. Minutes passed. Then a low hum. Then whispering. But this time, the freezer door slowly creaked open on its own. No wind. No shift in temperature. It just opened. Kyle approached it cautiously, holding up his phone. The air inside was still, frozen. Rows of meat still hanging on hooks. But something felt off. He took a step in, and the door slammed shut behind him. He whipped around, slammed on the emergency release, but didn't budge. His breath fogged up instantly. Panic set in. Then, there was again. That whisper. "You shouldn't have come back." It came from inside the freezer. Not from behind him. Not from outside. From somewhere deeper, past the shelves. He turned, trembling. There was a small gap between the racks where the meats hung. Something moved in the shadow, slowly, like it was crawling. Then came the laughter again. But this time it was louder, closer. It echoed strangely, like it was inside his own skull. Kyle screamed. He started banging on the door over and over. Finally, the latch gave out. He fell forward, gasping for breath, phone still in hand. When he played the recording later, there were no whispers, no laughter, just the steady hum of the freezer. The diner replaced the lock and told Kyle not to mess around again. But he wasn't imagining it. He knew he wasn't. He started researching the building. Hillbrook Diner had once been part of an old meatpacking facility. Decades ago, there'd been a fire. Several workers were trapped in a walk-in freezer with no ventilation. They died before anyone could reach them. And the chilling part? The freezer that exists now sits right where the original used to be. He quit the next day. But before he left, he decided to take one last look, just to prove it to himself. He opened the freezer slowly. Nothing seemed out of place. But as he turned to go, he heard it, just barely above the hum. Kyle. It was his name. Not whispered. Exhaled, like someone had been waiting all this time. Some believe trauma imprints itself into the walls of a place. that spaces soaked in fear and suffering don't just forget. They remember. In this case, what Kyle may have experienced wasn't just a ghost, but a psychic echo, a residual haunting, a leftover plea from the trapped and frozen dead. Or maybe the freezer doesn't trap cold. Maybe it traps souls. If you ever work the night shift in a restaurant and you hear something scratching at the freezer door, don't open it. Not everything that knocks is asking to be let out. Sometimes it's asking if you'll stay. It started like any other Wednesday night. Quiet, half empty, with a dull hum of jazz music playing over the speakers of a small, family-owned bistro tucked just outside town. It was the kind of place where regulars came in for the comfort food, not the company. The waitstaff rotated often, but the tables always stayed in the same place, like fixtures in a dream that refused to change. This night, something was different. At 7:13 p.m., the bell above the front door rang, but no one saw it open. That was the first strange thing. The hostess, Sarah, checked the doorway, thinking maybe it was a draft. But there he was, a man in a black coat, early 50s maybe, standing by the entrance. His skin was pale, not in the sickly way, but like he hadn't been touched by sunlight in months. He didn't speak, just looked around the restaurant like he had been there before, maybe even lived there in another life. Sarah offered a warm, professional smile, motioned to an empty booth near the windows, and asked, "Just one tonight?" He nodded, slowly, like his neck was reluctant to move. When he slid into the booth, the cushion didn't squeak. His coat made no sound against the vinyl. The air around him felt thicker, like time slowed by a fraction of a second in that corner of the restaurant. The menus were on the table, but he never touched them. The server that night, Michael, was new. He approached with the usual script. "Hi there, can I get you started with anything to drink?" No response, just a stare. Eyes dark, unfocused. Michael laughed nervously. "Water? Coke?" Still nothing. And then, finally, the man spoke. His voice wasn't hoarse or broken. It was flat, emotionless, like he was just reading from a memory. "I'll wait until everyone else leaves." That's all he said. Then silence. Michael shrugged it off, assuming the man was waiting on someone. He brought over a glass of water anyway, placing it gently on the table. The man didn't touch it, didn't even blink. Hours passed. The restaurant thinned out. Regulars finished their meals. The couple in the corner left. By 9:30 p.m., the only people left were the man in the booth and the staff. Sarah began to feel uneasy. Every time she looked at him, he was already looking at her. He never turned his head. His body never moved. But his gaze, always fixed, always heavy. At one point, Michael leaned over and whispered, "Do you think he's waiting for something? Or someone?" Sarah didn't answer. She was too focused on the fact that the man hadn't blinked once in over 2 hours. At 10:01 p.m., the last server clocked out. Chairs were flipped onto tables. The soft clinks of cleaning filled the air. The man still hadn't moved. Michael, in an attempt to clear the booth, politely asked again if he'd like to order. Maybe a dessert? The man turned his head just slightly. "I told you. I'll wait." Michael nodded and backed away. But something about the man's tone felt different now. As if he wasn't waiting for food. He was waiting for something to happen. By 10:45, only Sarah and Michael remained. The lights dimmed to their closing levels. A soft red glow fell across the man's face, but his expression remained unchanged. Michael began sweeping near the booth, but as he moved closer, the broom handle snapped in half. No warning, just a sudden, loud crack that echoed too long for such a small space. Startled, Sarah looked up and the man was gone. Except, the booth was still indented, like he had never left. The water glass, untouched, had completely frozen over. Solid ice, in a room that was still 73 degrees. Michael rushed to the security camera monitor behind the front counter. He scrolled back through the footage. What they saw made them both freeze. The man never entered the restaurant. On the footage, the bell rang. The door never opened. And yet the booth slowly indented, as if someone unseen had sat down. For 3 hours, the footage showed an empty booth. But in real life, both Sarah and Michael swore they saw him, spoke to him. Then, at 10:46 p.m., right when the broom broke, a single frame of the video glitched. A static blur, just 1 second long. And in that frame was a face. Unmistakable. Pale. Eyes black. Staring straight into the camera. They left the restaurant without speaking another word. When the owners reviewed the tape the next morning, the footage had been corrupted. All that remained was the audio. Just one sentence. "I'll wait until everyone else leaves." Was it a spirit? A glitch in time? A memory so intense it played itself out in reality? Or was it something worse? Something that exists only in the liminal spaces of everyday life, like a restaurant booth that never gets warm no matter how many people sit there? Places like these, restaurants, diners, cafes, they're designed to feel comforting, familiar, but that's what makes them vulnerable. Routine blinds us, and something else can slip in unnoticed. So next time you're sitting alone in a booth and someone stares at you from across the room, ask yourself, are they really there? Or are they just waiting for everyone else to leave? It started with a smell. Not the usual haze of fryer oil and reheated sauce that clung to the walls after every shift, but something wetter, rotting, like mildew that had learned to breathe. Carlos was the opening cook at a small Italian bistro in northern Maine. Tucked between an abandoned hardware store and a vape shop that never had customers, the place had somehow survived 4 owners, 2 economic downturns, and 1 grease fire. It was the kind of restaurant locals forgot existed until they craved pasta at 11 p.m. But Carlos liked the quiet, until the quiet started whispering. It was during a solo prep shift that he heard it. A dragging noise, not loud but deliberate, coming from a ceiling vents just above the line. At first, he assumed it was a raccoon or maybe a possum. The building was old. Gaps in the roof were patched with duct tape and denial. But the noise didn't match the frantic skitter of paws. It was slower. It scraped, like fingernails over old metal. Carlos reported it to management. They laughed it off. Rats, his boss said, tapping the wall. Big ones. Don't let him scare you. But it didn't sound scared. It sounded curious. That night, while cleaning down the kitchen, Carlos noticed a new grease stain above the flat-top grill. Long, narrow, and streaked like something had slid across the vent, grating from inside. No one else seemed bothered. In fact, the other cooks had stopped making eye contact with him altogether. Only Ellie, the night waitress, seemed to listen. She worked doubles and closed most nights. One evening, after a silent dinner shift, she leaned over the server window and asked, "You've heard it too, right?" Carlos nodded. She stared past him at the vent, her lips pale. "It doesn't like the walk-in. You noticed that?" He hadn't. But the next time the scraping started, late, around 10:40, he paid attention. And she was right. The noise would crawl from the front to the back, but never cross the walk-in cooler. It stopped there, as if the cold was a barrier, as if it feared what was inside. One shift, Carlos decided to test it. He stood under the vent with a flashlight. The light barely penetrated the slats, but for a brief moment, he saw something retreat. It wasn't fur or skin. It was smooth, wet-looking, like leather that hadn't dried. It hissed. Not a rat hiss. Not even human. Something in between, like a child trying to mimic both. Carlos dropped the light. It flickered, then died. That was when the lights in the kitchen shut off, one by one. Not all at once, one by one, as if something was moving above them, cutting their power as it crawled. He quit the next day, but quitting didn't stop the dreams. Carlos began dreaming of narrow tunnels and cold air and static voices behind metal walls. In them, he wasn't running from the thing in the vent. He was the thing, crawling, watching, waiting. A week later, Ellie called him in a panic. The restaurant had shut down without warning. No inspections, no notices. Just boarded up overnight. The last staff member inside had been the new night cook, one Carlos never met. Ellie had stayed late to grab her tips and swore she heard something scream from the ceiling as she left. Something too large to be a rat, too hungry to be anything else. A month passed. Carlos moved to a new city, got a job at a hotel kitchen. Life went on until the 3rd week. He was cleaning after a long shift when he heard it again. The same slow scrape, coming from the ceiling vent just above the fryer. He froze. It had followed him. There's a diner tucked off a forgotten exit along Highway 19. Locals call it Margot's Place, though the faded neon sign just says EATS. It's one of those relics from the 1960s. Chrome trim, torn booths, and a jukebox that hasn't played since vinyl was cool the first time. Sam, a 27-year-old waitress with a patient smile and tired eyes, had been working night shifts at Margot's for a little over a year. The pay wasn't great, the tips were worse, but she said it gave her space. Not a lot of noise here after dark, she once told a coworker. Just coffee, pies, and truckers trying to stay awake. But one night last October, everything shifted. It was a Thursday, slow, silent. Only two regulars sat in the back, their coffee gone cold as they muttered over crossword puzzles. The kitchen was quiet, and the radio played low static. At 2:14 a.m., Sam heard the soft ding of the front bell. She looked up. A family had come in. A man, woman, and two kids, maybe 10 and 12. They were dressed oddly. The parents in formal wear, like they'd just left a funeral or a wedding. The kids wore stiff, clean Sunday clothes, but their faces looked pale. Too pale. They didn't speak. They simply walked in and sat at booth 6. Booth 6 hadn't been used in years. Not since the storm. Not since the accident. Sam hesitated. Something felt off. The air around them was colder. The lights above the booth flickered, just once, and the jukebox made a low, grinding sound. Then silence again. She grabbed a menu and walked over, forcing a smile. "Good evening," she said gently. "Coffee to start." The father looked up. His eyes were glassy, and his voice was barely audible. "Meatloaf. For plates." No hesitation. No small talk. Just the order. Sam blinked. We stopped serving meatloaf on weekends. It's Thursday night." The mother raised her eyes next. "It's still on the board." Sam turned. Sure enough, behind the counter, in faded red chalk, "Thursday special, meatloaf, mashed gravy." But she had erased it herself 2 hours ago. Still, not wanting to argue, she went to the kitchen and made the order, scraping together leftover meatloaf from the earlier shift. When she returned, the booth was dead silent. The kids hadn't moved. They didn't blink. As she placed each plate down, she noticed something else. The silverware was already laid out, but she hadn't brought any. They ate slowly, mechanically, forks scraping plates with eerie rhythm. No one spoke. The children chewed with perfect coordination. Bite, chew, swallow, repeat. Then, when the plates were nearly clean, the mother said softly, "We're glad the booth's still here." Sam forced a smile. "Yeah, it's a nice spot." The woman turned to her with something between nostalgia and dread in her expression. It was the last place we were all together. Before Sam could ask, the lights flickered again. The diner radio, long silent, crackled to life with a voice she didn't recognize. Just static at first, then a fragment of a weather warning. Interstate closed due to flash flooding. Authorities urge caution. The same warning from 3 years ago. The same night, the Miller family drove off the bridge near exit 19. Sam's heart stopped. The names came flooding back. The father, Gregory Miller. His wife, Janet. And the two kids, Ben and Emily. Killed instantly. Their photo had hung in the town paper. The family used to eat here. Always booth 6. Always meatloaf. She looked down. The plates were empty. But the food hadn't been touched. No crumbs. No gravy smears. Just cold, clean ceramic. The booth was empty. She hadn't even seen them leave. Only the faint imprint of 4 figures in the vinyl seat remained, along with the smell of stale cologne and lavender. Sam stood frozen for nearly a minute, heart pounding, breath shallow. When she finally gathered the courage to step outside and look at the lot, nothing. No car. No footprints in the dust. The next morning, when she asked Margot, the owner, if someone had changed the board in the middle of the night, the old woman just blinked. "We stopped writing meatloaf up there after the Millers died," she said. "You remember. That was their order, every Thursday. You probably saw it so many times your brain filled it in." Sam quit 2 weeks later. Booth 6 remains empty. The lights above it still flicker from time to time, always at 2:14 a.m. And every now and then, the night shift finds 4 clean plates and perfectly placed silverware, just waiting. And the jukebox, broken since 1998, plays exactly one song no one remembers adding, "We'll Meet Again." It was just past 9 p.m. when the hostess noticed the name. The night had been slow, too slow for a Friday, but nothing out of the ordinary. Rain lashed the windows, and the outside world felt distant, muffled behind the glass. That's when a name appeared on the reservation screen. No ding, no pop-up, just there. Malcolm Eves. Party of one. 9:15 p.m. Table 17. The hostess frowned. She hadn't entered that. Neither had the manager. No phone call. No online booking. In fact, table 17 wasn't even supposed to be in use. It was tucked away in a dim corner of the dining area, the last table on the left. People rarely asked for it, and those who were seated there usually asked to move. There was just something off about it. The air felt heavier around that spot, and every time someone walked past, they'd glance at the seat as if they expected to see someone already sitting there. Still, a reservation was a reservation, even a mysterious one. She prepped the table anyway, not thinking too hard about it. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it wasn't. At exactly 9:15 p.m., the front door creaked open. No wind, no bell, just movement. She hadn't even heard footsteps. But there he was, a tall man, mid-60s, maybe, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, the kind that looked like it hadn't been fashionable in decades. His tie was crooked. His shoes were wet. But it wasn't the outfit that felt wrong. It was his expression. Calm, focused, as if he knew exactly what this place was and exactly why he was here. The hostess tried to greet him, but her voice caught. Something inside her told her not to ask how he got the reservation, not to question it, just guide him to the table. And so she did. Table 17, the last table on the left. As he sat, he whispered something. She didn't quite catch it, but it sounded like a name. Not his, someone else's. She stepped back, unnerved, but forced a smile, and offered him a menu. He didn't look at it. He didn't even blink. Instead, he turned his head toward the empty seat across from him and nodded, as if someone else had just sat down. The server assigned to that section was new, only a week in, but eager. He didn't question anything until he returned to the table and saw it. 2 sets of utensils, 2 glasses of water, and 2 folded napkins, one slightly damp, as if someone had just handled it. He was sure he'd only set one. He checked the seating chart, but only one reservation was listed. Still, the man was calm, polite, smiling faintly at the empty seat across from him, as though sharing a memory. The server asked if he'd like to order. The man replied without looking up, "I'll have what she's having." The server hesitated, uncertain, but the man simply nodded toward the chair. That same invisible presence, that same expectation. He wrote down an order at random and brought back 2 plates of food. And here's where it got strange. When the server returned 10 minutes later, both plates were empty. Not picked at, not rearranged. Completely clean, as if licked spotless. The man wiped his mouth, folded his napkin, and said, "She always loved the pasta." No one had said what the dish was, and he hadn't touched his fork. When the server brought the bill, the man reached into his coat pocket and handed him something. A folded envelope. Inside was a photo, a faded black and white image of the very restaurant, only much older. No modern signs, no digital screens. And seated at the last table on the left was the same man. Younger, smiling, beside a woman in a polka dot dress, laughing. The woman from the invisible chair. On the back of the photo, scribbled in messy ink, "Our Last Supper, July 12th, 1973. The server turned to ask a question, but the man was gone. No sound, no footsteps, just an empty seat, and a damp napkin folded neatly on the table. The staff searched the restaurant, reviewed the cameras, but the footage cut out at 9:14 p.m. Static, then black. The feed resumed at 9:46 p.m., when the man had supposedly already left. There was no record of him entering, no record of him leaving, no reservation in the system. But the envelope remained, and so did the photo. They keep it hidden now, deep in the office, tucked in the back of a drawer no one touches. Every few months, someone swears they see a name pop up again. Malcolm Eves, Party of one, 9:15 p.m., Table 17. And sometimes, just sometimes, the server will notice the utensils have been moved. A napkin unfolded. A chair slightly askew, like someone invisible had stood up. But no one speaks of it anymore. Because those who do, they start hearing footsteps behind them when the dining room is empty. They start seeing reflections in windows where no one stands. And always, they dream of a woman in a polka dot dress, sitting across from them in the dark, whispering, "He'll be back for dessert." There's a little diner just off Route 27 in Pennsylvania. One of those forgotten places that's been open since the 50s with vinyl booths, humming neon lights, and a jukebox that still works if you hit it just right. Locals call it Marty's. But if you ask the staff, there's one part of Marty's you don't talk about. The last booth by the window. It started as an urban legend. Something the new hires would laugh about during slow shifts. They said there was a man who always sat in that booth. Same time, same posture, same look in his eyes. He'd arrive at exactly 2:13 a.m., an odd time considering the diner closes at 3. He always wore a gray suit, slightly outdated, with a dull maroon tie. He never ordered, never spoke, just stared straight ahead, eyes wide, unblinking. At first, the night staff thought he was just a regular, maybe a guy working graveyard shifts somewhere. Quiet, lonely, nothing to fear. But then, strange things started happening. It was Cassie, the night waitress, who first noticed it. Every time a man came in, the air would change. Not colder exactly, but heavier. Like the diner wasn't fully there anymore. Like something was pressing in from the edges. And then there were the clocks. No matter what, every clock in the diner would freeze at 2:26 a.m. Only for a minute or two, but enough that you noticed. The customers who stayed that late, usually truckers or drunk college kids, stopped sitting near that booth. They didn't say why. They just avoided it. Some would glance over and quickly look away, muttering things like, "That guy gives me the creeps," or "his eyes feel wrong." Cassie tried once to engage with him. Just a simple, "Can I get you anything?" The man didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. His skin had that waxy, too smooth texture, like a mannequin left too long under a heat lamp. His hands rested perfectly still on the table, palms down. Every part of him was motionless, except for those eyes. Wide open, bloodshot, not dry, not watery, just wrong. Cassie swore that when she walked away, she could feel him staring through her. Not her, but through her. Like he wasn't seeing her at all, but something inside her. Something buried. And then there was the photo. One night, a curious college kid tried to sneak a picture of him. He kept the flash off, slid his phone just over the back of the booth behind him, and snapped a photo. He looked at the screen. There was no one in the picture, just the booth. Empty, even though they could all see him sitting there, perfectly still. The kid laughed it off, but left without finishing his fries. Didn't even ask for it to go box. He just muttered, "I'm not hungry anymore," and practically ran out the door. Later that night, the booth was completely empty. But when Cassie went to clean the table, she found a single maroon thread caught on the edge of the seat. Just like the man's tie. And the ketchup bottle? It was full before. But now it was half empty, and no one else had touched it. By now, the staff had stopped questioning it. They didn't approach the man. They didn't speak to him. They didn't acknowledge him at all. He just was, like a permanent part of the diner. Like the booths or the napkin holders. But here's where it gets darker. One night, Marty, the owner, came in during a late shift. He hadn't been around much in recent years, but he used to run the place himself back in the 70s. He took one look at the man in the booth and went pale. Marty told Cassie later that he recognized him. Said the man used to come in decades ago, back when the diner was newer, always at the same time, always the same booth. And then one day, he just stopped coming. 2 days later, there was a horrible wreck on Route 27. An accident involving a man in a gray suit. The police said he had lost control of his car, fell asleep at the wheel. But Marty remembered him. He said the man was always tired, always rubbing his eyes, blinking hard. Until one day, he stopped blinking altogether. He died at 2:26 a.m., right when the clocks freeze. Marty left that night and never came back. The diner still operates, though. Staff still changes. But the man in the booth remains. Some believe he's stuck, caught in some kind of loop between the living and the dead. Others think he's not a ghost at all, but a fragment, a residual echo of regret and exhaustion so strong it left a scar on time itself. There are even rumors that if you stare back at him for too long, something happens to you. Not all at once, not obviously, but you start noticing things. You forget why you walked into a room. You lose time. Your reflection doesn't quite match your expression. And worst of all, you stop blinking. So if you ever find yourself on Route 27 late at night, and you see the glowing sign from Marty's Diner, just remember, some booths aren't empty because no one wants to sit there. They're empty because something already does, and it's waiting for someone to see it. Maybe someone like you. Fade to silence. Jukebox hum, then a faint whisper. 2:26 again. It was just after 9 p.m. on a rainy Thursday night when Alec, a line cook at a mid-tier bistro in Portland, noticed something strange with the lights. The dinner rush had passed. Only a few tables remained occupied, the ambient hum of conversation mixing with the hiss of the grill behind him. He was wiping down his station, waiting for his final ticket to come in, when the fluorescent ceiling lights flickered, once, twice, then settled. He didn't think much of it. The restaurant was old. So was the wiring. But when the lights flickered again, longer this time, and with a sound like the bulbs were struggling to stay tethered to the ceiling, he paused. Something in the rhythm of it felt wrong. Like the light wasn't just dimming, it was breathing. When they finally steadied, the kitchen felt colder. The air was still, as if the restaurant itself was holding its breath. Alex shook it off. Maybe the AC had kicked in. Maybe he was just overtired. Then the ticket machine dinged. A single order. Table 6. He turned to check the floor. Table 6 was empty. It had been cleared and reset half an hour ago. No guests. No server anywhere near it. Alec poked his head into the dining area and called out, "Hey, did someone send an order from table 6? The manager, Rachel, looked up from the register. Table SAXS been empty since the couple left. You sure it wasn't a glitch? Alec hesitated. Maybe. He returned to the kitchen and picked up the ticket. It read, 1 rare steak. No sides. No salt. Plate must be cold. He was about to toss it in the trash when the lights flickered again, this time all across the kitchen, and in that brief flash of darkness, Alex swore he saw someone standing at the pass. Just a shadow. Tall. Still. No movement. No face. The lights came back. The pass was empty. He stood there, heartbeat climbing into his throat. Then something even stranger happened. The stove clicked on by itself. No pilot light. No one near it. Alec didn't know why he did it, but he prepped the steak. Seared it quickly, bloody in the center. No seasoning. Just meat. He chilled the plate in the walk-in freezer. It felt expected. When it was done, he placed the plate under the heat lamp. But when he looked up, the plate was gone. He didn't hear anyone walk by. Didn't hear the swing of the kitchen door. He stepped into the dining room again. Table 6 now had someone seated at it. A man, wearing a black suit, pale skin, head bowed, still as a wax figure. Alec blinked. The man was gone, but the chair remained slightly pulled out, as if someone had just been sitting there. That was when Rachel called from across the restaurant. "Alec, are you okay?" He nodded slowly, even though his throat had gone dry. "Lights are acting weird again," she added. "Think you can check the breaker box in the back?" He didn't want to, but he did. The back hallway was unlit. He used his phone flashlight, walking past the dry storage, past the staff lockers. The breaker box was at the far end, right beside the disused dumbwaiter shaft that hadn't worked in years. As he reached out to open the panel, the lights flickered once more. And in that brief moment of darkness, the hallway changed. It was still the restaurant, but it wasn't. The walls were warped, sweating like flesh under plastic. The dumbwaiter door hung open, and something was breathing inside it. He turned to run and slammed into a figure. The man from table 6. Only now, Alec could see his face. Or rather, he could see through it. His eyes were holes like torn cloth. No lips, just an expression stretched into a static grin, as if someone had drawn it on. "Thank you for the meal," the man whispered. His voice didn't match his mouth. It sounded like it came from the walls. Alec blacked out. When he woke up, he was in the kitchen. Rachel was shaking him awake. "You passed out, man. What happened?" He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His eyes darted to the pass. There, resting beneath the heat lamp, was the cold plate. Empty, but wet with something that wasn't steak juice. A note lay folded beside it. It was printed from the ticket machine. Same time next Thursday. He never returned to work. No one believed him. But every Thursday at 9 p.m., the restaurant's lights still flicker, just once. And the ticket machine prints a single order. Always from table 6. Always the same. Rare steak. No sides. Cold plate. No salt. It started with the smell of something burning. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. The kind of scent that makes you pause for a second before shrugging it off. The restaurant was always full of strange odors. Garlic sizzling in pans, charred onions, the acidic tinge of cleaning solution mixed with fryer oil. But this was different, acrid, like old grease and singed hair. That night, the kitchen staff at Bellamy's Diner was running on fumes. Fridays were always brutal. Endless tickets, grumbling customers, and the kind of stress that frays the edges of reality. But when the head chef called out sick at the last minute, things spiraled. By 7:30, the line was crashing, orders were backed up 20 minutes, and tempers were boiling harder than the pasta pot. That's when a new guy showed up. No one had seen him walk in. He was just there behind the line, already in a grease-stained apron, sleeves rolled up, flipping patties like he'd been there for years. The weird part? No one questioned it. Not at first. There's a kind of unspoken rule in restaurant kitchens. When things get chaotic, you don't ask too many questions. If someone's helping, you let them help. And he was fast. Unnaturally fast. Chopping vegetables in a blur, moving from station to station without breaking a sweat, all while smiling. Not just a polite smile, either. This was wide, teeth-baring like he was enjoying the chaos. But the dishwasher, Caleb, was the first to say something. He caught the manager near the back entrance, away from the roar of the line. Asked him who the new guy was. The manager frowned. Checked the schedule. Checked the employee roster. Checked the security cameras. No new hires. No temps. No deliveries scheduled. No one had come through the back door all night. When they returned to the kitchen, the cook was gone. Everyone assumed he'd left. Quietly. Maybe embarrassed. Maybe just weird. But then, one of the prep cooks pointed at the grill. 3 burgers were still sizzling. Perfectly seared, neatly arranged. But no one had touched the grill since he disappeared. Over the next few nights, the smiling cook returned. Never clocked in. Never left through the doors. Just appeared on the line during the worst of the rush, blending in seamlessly, moving like he knew the place better than anyone. But it wasn't until the 4th night that someone realized something was wrong. It was Olivia, the fry cook. She'd cut herself badly while slicing potatoes and had to step out to patch it up. When she came back, she found the smiling cook in her station, still wearing that apron, still grinning. But this time, he wasn't cooking. He was staring directly at her knife. Not touching it, just watching it, head tilted, lips twitching, like the blade was telling him something only he could hear. When she stepped in, he turned toward her. His smile twitched wider, and without a word, he stepped aside and vanished down the hallway that led to the walk-in freezer. But when Olivia followed seconds later, he was gone. No one else saw him that night. She tried to explain to the others, but the more she described him, the more everyone realized something disturbing. No one could remember his name. No one remembered him speaking. No one remembered what his voice even sounded like. They only remembered the smile. The head chef returned the next week. Things calmed down. Orders stabilized. But attention remained, quiet and unsettling. The kitchen felt colder. The burners took longer to light. Some staff swore they heard footsteps behind them when the line was empty. And Caleb, the dishwasher, refused to go near the back hallway alone. Then came a night the freezer door wouldn't open. It was locked from the inside, which shouldn't have been possible. And when they finally pried it open, they found something that chilled everyone to the bone. On the frost-covered back wall was a smiley face, drawn with what looked like grease. Or maybe blood. No one could be sure. But it was unmistakably a smile, long, wide, and childlike. And underneath it, carved into the ice with something sharp, were the words, "I'll cover the rush." The next day, the restaurant brought in a priest. Blessing, salt, the whole deal. The walk-in was deep cleaned. Cameras were installed in every corner. But none of that mattered, because the smiling cook hasn't stopped showing up. Not every night, just during the worst of it. When the tickets pile too high, when a cook burns out or walks off the line in a rage, when the chaos reaches a breaking point, he's there, always behind someone, always ready to help, and always smiling. Some say he was a former employee who died in that kitchen, burned alive in the old grease fire that shut the diner down back in the 90s. Others think he's something older, hungrier, a shadow that feeds on disorder, on exhaustion, on fear. The weirdest part? Management doesn't want to talk about it. They've stopped hiring temps. They leave an extra apron out. And the current head chef? He started scheduling an extra hand on paper. No name, no pay, just a blank slot that says, "Covering the rush, do not disturb." People still eat at Bellamy's. The food's good. The kitchen runs smooth now, almost too smooth. But if you ever peek through the swinging kitchen door and see someone at the grill, smiling too wide, moving too fast, don't ask who he is. Just hope he's not looking back. Mila wasn't particularly superstitious. She had worked in kitchens since she was 16 and had seen the industry chew up and spit out the most rational people she knew. She figured paranoia came with the stress. Night shifts, flickering fluorescents, that constant sense of being watched in the prep area. It was easy to start imagining things when you're running on caffeine and 4 hours of sleep. So when she started her new job at Belmare Trattoria, she dismissed the odd layout of the place. A charming, upscale Italian place in a gentrified corner of an old city block. The building was long and narrow, with low ceilings and far too many mirrors. They were everywhere, not just in the dining area, but in strange places above the bar behind the coffee station, even in the cramped hallway leading to the restrooms. Most were antique, spotted with age, the glass slightly warped, but all were obsessively clean. And the strange thing was they never seemed to reflect quite what they should. It started small, a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye that didn't match what was happening around her. A customer raising their glass in a mirror before they actually moved. A glimpse of herself smiling faintly in the glass while her real face stayed still. At first, she blamed the lighting. The mirrors weren't well lit. Shadows stretched unnaturally, making people seem taller, thinner, more distant. But the distortions were consistent, predictable. She began to memorize them, like watching a film just out of sync. Then, during her third week, something changed. It was a slow Tuesday night. Just 3 tables filled, all nursing wine and conversation. Mila was restocking the glassware near the end of the bar when she caught sight of herself in the mirror. Only, this time, she wasn't moving. She was frozen, staring. Her mirrored reflection stood behind the bar, one hand on a wine glass, the other at her side, unmoving. But Mila was wiping the counter, breathing, blinking. She stopped. So did the reflection, a full beat behind. She stared at it, heart beginning to race. Then, as she leaned in slightly, her reflection tilted its head, just a little too far. That's when she noticed the eyes in the mirror weren't hers. The color was right, sure, but there was something deeper, something wrong. A subtle dilation that made the pupils seem almost too round. And the smile, that faint, unnatural smile, was still there, growing now, curling at the edges like smoke. She blinked, and the mirror caught up, snapping back to normal. The smile vanished. Her own face stared back, flushed and confused. She laughed quietly, told herself it was stress again. But the mirrors didn't stop. Each night after that, she began to avoid eye contact with her own reflection. But reflections were everywhere. Even the polished steel of the espresso machine caught angles she didn't expect. Customers would wave to someone behind her, only to say, "Sorry, I thought someone was there." Waiters would walk out of the kitchen only to freeze mid-step, eyes locked on a mirrored surface, pale and confused. One night, one of the servers, Jonah, took a smoke break in the alley and didn't come back in. When Mila went to check on him, she found him standing in the corridor between the back door and the kitchen, staring at the long wall mirror near the dish pit. He didn't speak, just stood there, fixated. "What's wrong?" she asked. He looked at her slowly, almost like it hurt. "Did you see it smile?" he whispered. They wrote it off as a panic attack. But Jonah quit that night, left mid-shift, never returned for his paycheck. The owners, an older couple who rarely left the office upstairs, brushed it off. "The mirrors are part of the ambience," they said. "Creates space, elegance." One night, after close, Mila decided to test something. She turned off all the lights. The dining room fell into shadow, save for the faint orange glow of the exit sign and the underbar LEDs. She stood in front of the largest mirror in the room, the one over the wine rack where the warping was worst. And she waited. For several minutes, nothing happened. Just her, watching herself, breathing, blinking. Then, the reflection blinked out of sync. Not by much, but enough. She leaned in. The mirrored Mila stayed still. Her heart pounded. She reached out, her fingers brushing the glass. Her reflection didn't follow. Instead, it stepped forward, not toward her, but deeper into the mirror, as if turning to walk away, into a space that didn't exist. Mila stumbled back, her breath hitched in her throat. She reached for her phone, opened the camera, and turned it toward the mirror. Nothing, just her, perfectly mirrored. The next morning, she confronted the owners. She wanted answers, something, anything, but they were cold, impassive. "There are things older than this building," the woman said, "and some things are only ever seen when they want to be." "We never said the mirrors were for decoration," the man added. "They're windows, nothing more." That night, Mila didn't show up for a shift. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her apartment was empty. Her car, still parked in the restaurant's back lot. Security footage showed her finishing her shift, wiping the bar, and then walking toward the hallway mirror. She never walked past it. The footage glitches there. Just static. But if you go to Belmare Trattoria today, if you sit near the mirror behind the bar, and if the lighting hits just right, some say you'll catch a glimpse of a waitress in the glass. Not your waitress. Not anyone who works there now. Just a girl with tired eyes and a faint, unsettling smile. There's a small Italian restaurant tucked between a hardware store and a defunct antique shop in upstate New York. Family-owned. Friendly atmosphere. Wood paneling stained dark with age. And every night, the same group of regulars files in just before closing. Quiet, predictable, like clockwork. The hostess, Claire, was 22. She just moved to town, picking up the job for the summer before college resumed. Friendly, upbeat. A little shy, but sharp. She was the kind of person who noticed when a picture frame had been moved an inch to the left, or when a familiar face suddenly felt unfamiliar. That night, a thunderstorm was coming. The forecast warned of rolling blackouts and flooded roads, and customers trickled out early. By 10:30, only one table remained, an elderly couple sitting in near silence, sipping wine they hadn't ordered. Claire noticed the receipt printer hadn't printed a ticket for them. It hadn't printed anything in the last 15 minutes. She didn't think much of it at the time. The couple sat at table 4, an old two-top by the window with a slight tilt. But when she glanced again, they were gone. No door chime, no goodbye, no movement. Just gone, like a scene skipped. She walked over to the table. 2 empty glasses. No condensation. The wine stain on the tablecloth looked like a smudge, not a spill. When she turned back toward the host stand, she noticed something even stranger. Someone was in the hallway. Just past the kitchen's swinging doors, a tall figure stood with its back half turned. Dimly lit by the overhead fluorescence, it cast a long, almost serpentine shadow across the tile floor. Too long. Much too long. Claire called out. No answer. She thought it was Marco, the dishwasher, taking out the trash. But Marco always whistled, something upbeat and off-key. Tonight, no whistle. No sound at all. The figure moved slowly. It didn't walk. It glided, disappearing into the hallway that led out to the back alley. The doors creaked shut behind it. Claire hesitated. She didn't know why she followed. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was that long, unnatural shadow that stretched into the kitchen like a crack in reality. Or maybe she wasn't quite thinking like herself anymore. She passed through the kitchen, her flats tapping softly on the tile. The back exit stood slightly ajar, rain tapping rhythmically against the metal door. When she stepped out, she expected the cold slap of the storm. But the air was still, dry, and there at the far edge of the alley was the shadow. It wasn't attached to anything. It just stood there long, jagged, cast from no source of light. And then, slowly, it began to move again, slithering around the corner behind the dumpster. Claire felt something stir in her stomach. Not fear, something older, deeper. The kind of instinct buried under centuries of evolution. The voice that whispers, "Don't follow." But she did. She turned the corner. Nothing. The alley was empty. No footprints. No movement. No sound. Just a damp, concrete silence pressing in around her. She turned to go back inside, only to realize the door had closed. Locked. She knocked once. Then again, louder. No one answered. She pulled out her phone. No service. That's when she heard it. A whisper, coming from somewhere near her left ear, even though no one was there. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language at all. Just dry, broken syllables strung together like teeth clicking in the dark. She ran, or she tried to, but the alley didn't seem to end. The more she moved, the more the brick walls stretched, twisted. Her steps echoed too long. Her shadow didn't follow her anymore. It led her, dragging itself farther and farther ahead. When the kitchen door finally slammed open, Marco's voice cut through the rain. "Claire?" She stumbled out of the alley and into the light. Soaked, pale, shaking. She didn't say anything. She couldn't. Marco stared at her, confused. "Where were you? We've been looking for you for almost an hour." But Claire checked her phone. Less than 5 minutes had passed. She never told anyone what happened. Not the manager. Not her friends. Not even herself. Really, some memories are too thin to hold without tearing. But from that night on, she was never the same. She started checking her shadow in every reflective surface she passed. Mirrors, puddles, windows. Sometimes it moved a beat too late. Other times it didn't move at all. Some restaurants close at midnight. Others never really close at all. They just wait. And if you follow the wrong shadow into the wrong alley, you may not come back as the same person. Or worse, your shadow might return without you. It started as a slow shift. Snow drifted past the restaurant's windows like tiny ghosts outside, muffling the world in silence. Amelia, the closing manager, liked winter nights like this. Business was slow, the tips were decent, and the regulars were polite enough to leave before midnight. The restaurant was a quaint little place in Vermont, built in the 1940s, with a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the early 90s. The centerpiece of that kitchen was an old walk-in fridge, a massive metal cube with frostbitten hinges and a mechanical hum that never quite stopped. It was cold, always colder than it should be. And worse, the lock system on it was backward. The handle to open it was inside. Most of the newer staff joked about it, calling it the cold room with no way out. But the older employees, those who'd worked there for more than a year, rarely laughed about it. That night, Amelia was counting out the register when she heard the fridge slam shut. It wasn't subtle. It echoed through the kitchen like a body hitting a wall. At first, she figured one of the line cooks had forgotten to wedge the door open while restocking. But when she called out, "Carlos," no one responded. She checked the schedule. Carlos had clocked out an hour ago. She was supposed to be alone. When she walked into the kitchen, the door to the walk-in was sealed. Not ajar, not closing slowly. Fully sealed. The metal looked damp, as if someone had just pressed their hand against it. Amelia paused. "Maybe he came back," she said aloud, as if the sound of her own voice could somehow soften the tension building in her chest. She knocked lightly on the door, then listened. Knock, knock. 2 soft thuds came from inside, but they weren't a response. They were delayed, almost hesitant, like whatever was inside didn't want to be heard. She opened the fridge. It was empty. No Carlos. No boxes on the floor. Nothing but frost and that same mechanical hum, louder now in the confined space. She leaned in, checking the racks. Then she noticed something odd. Her breath, it wasn't fogging up. The air was freezing, but it didn't behave like real cold. It felt dead. No humidity. No frost on her arms. Just stillness. Then came the smell. It wasn't food rot. It was older than that. Like rust, dirt, and wet stone. The kind of scent you find in the basement of a forgotten building. She stepped back, but the second she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her. She didn't scream. Not at first. She just stood there, waiting for the lock to click, for the silence to return. But instead, something scraped against the far wall. A dragging sound, like fingernails pulled slowly across metal. She spun around, expecting to see a rat. But it wasn't a rat. It was a handprint, pressed into frost on the wall, long fingers spread wide from the inside. She backed toward the door and shoved it open. Miraculously, it wasn't stuck. She stumbled into the kitchen, heart pounding. But when she turned to look back, the door was wide open. No sound, no handprint, no dragging, nothing. She locked it for the night, threw her coat on, and left without finishing her register count. The next morning, when she came back to open, the walk-in fridge was open again. Inside were 4 handprints, all pressed at chest height, side by side, as if someone or something had been waiting in there. Management replaced the fridge 2 months later after multiple staff members refused to close alone. Some claimed they heard breathing from inside. One cook fainted after seeing what he described as someone in the corner, but not standing, just hanging like meat. They brought in a new model with modern safety locks. But here's where it gets stranger. The old fridge wasn't thrown out. It was sold for scrap to a recycling yard across the state. And 3 weeks later, the yard reported that someone had broken into their lot. And the only thing missing was that fridge. It had been taken, without the help of a truck, a dolly, or tire marks. Just vanished. The employees joked that maybe the ghost took it back. But Amelia doesn't laugh anymore. She left the restaurant job soon after. Not because of the handprints. Not because of the sound she swears she still hears in the silence. But because she checked the staff records one last time. Carlos never clocked out, and they never found him. In restaurants, walk-ins are meant to keep things cold and preserved. But in this case, something else was preserved in there. Something not quite alive, and it still hasn't thawed. For as long as Ava could remember, Table 13 had been something of an inside joke among the staff at the Marlowe house. It sat tucked away in a quiet corner of the restaurant, far from the windows, just under the antique clock that hadn't worked in years. Most diners didn't even notice the table, and when they did, they rarely chose to sit there. But every few months, usually during heavy storms or on oddly quiet evenings, the maitre d' would find a last-minute reservation scribbled into the logbook for Table 13. No name, just a time, always 8 p.m. sharp. At first, Ava thought it was just a quirk of the place, some kind of promotional stunt or superstitious tradition carried on by the older staff. She'd only been at the Marlowe house for 3 weeks when she was first assigned to that table. Her manager was brief. "Don't ask questions. Just treat them like any other guest," he said. "And whatever they leave, don't keep it." She assumed he meant the tip. That night, at exactly 8 o'clock, a man in a gray suit appeared. He had a kind face, but something about him felt out of sync, like a film played at the wrong speed. His smile lingered a little too long. His voice had a slight echo, and though the restaurant's lights flickered briefly as he entered, nobody seemed to notice but her. He ordered steak, rare, a glass of red wine. Nothing unusual, but he barely touched his food. He spent most of the time watching the room, as if trying to memorize every detail. When he spoke, it was in a quiet, thoughtful cadence, and he asked Ava's strange questions. Do they still light candles at dusk in the square? Is the old train station still boarded up? Or did they open it again? Tell me, do you believe in déjà vu? Ava answered politely, unsure if he was eccentric or just lonely. But when she returned to clear his table, he was gone. The chair was still pushed in, the napkin folded precisely. And on the bill tray, next to the check, was a tip, several heavy silver coins that shimmered oddly under the chandelier. She picked them up. They were cold, colder than metal should feel. She turned them over, squinting. The dates were old. Too old. 1912, 1898. One had the profile of a president she didn't recognize. etched in a style she'd never seen. Her fingers tingled where they touched the coins, like they'd fallen asleep. Her manager took one look and snatched them from her hand. I said, "Don't keep it," he said. "Burn the receipt. Throw the rest away." She thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. Over the next week, Ava noticed small things changing. Nothing dramatic, just wrong. The kitchen's walk-in freezer now had a second door. The mural on the far wall of the dining room looked different. The woman holding the wine glass had shifted her gaze. Her eyes followed Ava when she passed. Ava mentioned it to another server. "Oh, table 13, the woman said. "Yeah, that spot's cursed. But subtle. You don't vanish or die. You just come undone." Slowly, Ava tried to laugh it off. But every night after that, she dreamed in sepia tones. Dreams of men in dusty suits, diners with hollow eyes, and an old, crackling phonograph whispering songs she'd never heard but somehow knew the lyrics to. The restaurant appeared in those dreams too, but always older, covered in vines, abandoned, with table 13 still perfectly set. She stopped sleeping well. She started noticing gaps in her memory, small lapses, like forgetting what day it was, or whether her parents were still alive. She called them out of habit, only to hang up when she realized she didn't remember their voices. 2 weeks later, the reservation reappeared. Table 13, 8 p.m., no name. Ava told her manager she didn't want the table. He just nodded. "That's not how it works. Once you serve them, you're part of it." At exactly 8 o'clock, the man returned. This time, he brought a guest. A pale woman in a velvet dress with soft curls and empty, unfocused eyes. She didn't speak, just sipped her tea and stared off toward nothing. Ava tried to stay composed, but when she brought the dessert, the man looked at her and said, "You remind me of someone I knew. She waited on me once, long ago. She asked too many questions." Then he smiled. "She doesn't exist anymore." The couple left quietly. On the table, another stack of coins, some even older this time. One had no date at all, just an engraving, the Marlowe House. EST 1871. Never closed. Ava never touched them. She quit the next day. But the Marlowe House still operates. Quietly, elegantly, always with an open slot for table 13. Sometimes it's a man, sometimes a woman. Sometimes they bring a child who never eats, just stares at the staff. And every time, they tip in coins that shouldn't exist. Restaurants are built to serve, and perhaps to preserve. A moment, a memory, a ritual. But what if some tables are more than furniture? What if they're anchors, holding onto a version of time that no longer fits within our world? And what happens to the people who touch that time, even for just a moment? Table 13 always tips, but the real cost is never in the check.